I stepped into the boardroom, my heels clicking against the polished floor. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, casting sharp shadows across the mahogany table. Seth was already seated at the far end, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, laughing at something on his phone. His smile vanished the moment he looked up and saw me. "Hello, Seth," I said, setting my briefcase down with deliberate care. His face went white. The confident executive who had been running this division for the past decade suddenly looked like a deer caught in headlights. His mouth opened, then closed, no words coming out. "Tiffany," he whispered, his voice cracking slightly. "What are you doing here?" I pulled out my chair and sat down, never breaking eye contact. "I'm the external turnaround lead your board hired. Didn't they tell you?" I opened my briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Before we begin, let's agree on something important. Everything we discussed today goes on the record." Seth's hands trembled as he reached for his water glass. 10 years had passed, but he remembered exactly who I was. And now, I was back. My name is Tiffany Olson, and 10 years ago I thought Seth was my best friend. We started at the company on the same day, two eager graduates with big dreams. We worked side by side, shared coffee breaks, and celebrated each other's wins. I trusted him completely. That trust died on a Tuesday morning in March. Security walked me out while my coworkers watched in silence, my palms pressed against a cardboard box filled with my personal items. My team refused to make eye contact as I passed their desks. The humiliation burned like acid in my chest. They said I had sabotaged our biggest client demo. The evidence was clear. System logs showed malicious code deployed from my login credentials. The demo crashed spectacularly in front of 50 potential buyers. Millions of dollars in deals evaporated in minutes. Seth was the only one who seemed genuinely shocked. "Tiffany would never do this," he told anyone who would listen. But his support meant nothing against the digital evidence. As security escorted me through the lobby, Seth caught my arm. "This is just business," he whispered. "Nothing personal." He said it was only business. Then he took my future. The algorithm should have been mine. For 18 months, I had worked nights and weekends perfecting it. Adaptive pricing for enterprise software, a system that could analyze market conditions, competitor behavior, and customer data to set optimal prices in real time. I had notebooks filled with calculations, timestamps on every code commit, and a simple idea that outperformed human negotiation by 30%. The breakthrough came at 2 a.m. on a Sunday night. I remember the moment clearly. My laptop screen glowed in my dark apartment as the test results scrolled past. Perfect accuracy on every simulation. Monday morning, I shared my excitement with Seth. We were project partners after all. I showed him the core algorithm, explained the machine learning model, and outlined the business case. His eyes lit up with the same enthusiasm I felt. "This could change everything," he said, leaning over my shoulder to study the code. 2 weeks later, the demo happened. The system crashed, I was fired, and 6 months after that, Seth presented his adaptive pricing breakthrough to the executive team. The same algorithm, the same model, the same business case. That was the last day I ever played defense. The next 10 years were the hardest of my life, but also the most important. I refused to let Seth's betrayal define me. Instead, I used it as fuel. I enrolled in night classes while working temp jobs during the day. Financial auditing, compliance frameworks, digital forensics. I studied everything that could help me understand how businesses really worked. I passed brutal certifications that most people failed twice. I learned to spot lies in balance sheets and find evidence that others missed. After 5 years of grinding, I joined a compliance consultancy that specialized in high-stakes corporate rescues. Companies called us when they were facing bankruptcy, fraud investigations, or hostile takeovers. I learned oversight techniques that could gut a lie without raising my voice. My specialty became digital forensics and financial crime. I developed a reputation for finding the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. Colleagues called me the surgeon because I could dissect a company's problems with precision. The irony was perfect. Seth's betrayal had turned me into exactly the kind of person who could destroy him. Our next client was a technology company facing a board revolt. The name had changed, but I recognized it immediately. It was a rebrand of the company that had exiled me. Present day. I sat across from the board of directors and laid out my discovery plan. 24 months of access logs, procurement ledgers, vendor contracts, and shadow IT scans. Every email, every transaction, every digital footprint would be examined. The timeline is aggressive but necessary. I explained to the 12 faces around the table. Your renewal deadline with your major client is in 6 weeks. We need clean books before then. Board Chair Pearl Keene, a sharp woman in her 60s, nodded approvingly. What kind of cooperation do you need from the current management team? I smiled thinly. Complete transparency, no exceptions. Seth shifted uncomfortably in his seat. As division president, he would be under the microscope more than anyone else. Some of our proprietary systems might be sensitive to external review, he said carefully. Then we'll review them very carefully, I replied. Non-compliance will be documented, not debated. The room fell silent. I controlled the scope of this investigation, and everyone knew it. More importantly, I controlled the clock. In 6 weeks, the truth would come out, whether Seth wanted it to or not. I opened my laptop and began typing. The hunt had officially begun. The resistance started immediately. CRO Anika Strong lost a critical batch of emails from the past 2 years. The IT director claimed their archive server was temperamental and might take weeks to restore. Seth apologized for the delays, blaming budget cuts and outdated infrastructure. I had expected this. 10 years of compliance work had taught me that guilty people always played the same games. They hoped I would get frustrated and move on to easier targets. Instead, I walked into the CFO's office and placed a single sheet of paper on his desk. Jamari Richter read it twice before looking up at me with wide eyes. You're invoking the client renewal clause? He asked. Page 12, section 4, I confirmed. No data, no renewal. The client requires clean compliance records before extending the contract. If we can't produce those records, they can terminate with cause. Jamari's face went pale. The client represented 60% of the company's revenue. Losing them would mean massive layoffs, possibly bankruptcy. I leaned forward slightly. I'll wait for the data. But the board won't wait forever. 2 hours later, Anika Strong personally delivered 3 boxes of printed emails to my temporary office. A junior analyst named Danny Park knocked on my door the next afternoon. She was maybe 25, with nervous eyes and bitten fingernails. She glanced over her shoulder before stepping inside and closing the door behind her. Are conversations with you confidential? She asked in a whisper. Depends what you want to tell me, I replied. But I protect sources when I can. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket and slid it across my desk. It was a vendor roster, dozens of companies that provided various services to our division. One name made my stomach clench. Voss Insight Partners. That one bothers me, Danny said, pointing at the entry. They bill us every month, but I've never seen them do any actual work. When I asked my manager about it, she told me to stop asking questions. I studied the document carefully. Voss Insight Partners was listed as providing algorithmic advisory services. The monthly billing amount made my blood boil. They were charging premium consulting rates for work that looked suspiciously familiar. Interesting name, I said, keeping my voice level. Let's see who signs the invoices. Danny nodded and hurried out of my office. I sat back in my chair and smiled. The first thread was starting to unravel. I spent the next 3 days tracing financial records like a detective following clues. Voss Insight Partners appeared in dozens of transactions over the past 8 years. Small payments at first, then growing larger and more frequent. The pattern was clear once you knew how to look. The payments spiked before every quarterly review. Whenever the division needed to show strong performance metrics, money flowed to Voss Insight Partners for specialized consulting. Then, like magic, the performance numbers improved. I cross-referenced the payment dates with system deployment logs. Every improvement coincided with updates to the adaptive pricing algorithm, the same algorithm I had created 10 years ago, the same one Seth had claimed as his own breakthrough. The paper trail led to a single cost center that ballooned right before each quarterly presentation. Someone was paying an outside vendor to maintain and enhance my stolen work, then taking credit for the results. I highlighted the clause about conflicts of interest in the company handbook. According to policy, any vendor relationship involving current or former employees had to be disclosed to the board. I attached the evidence to tomorrow's agenda. Seth was about to have some very uncomfortable questions to answer. I found Seth in a glass-walled huddle room, typing frantically on his laptop. Through the transparent walls, I could see other employees trying not to stare as I approached. The entire office buzzed with tension. Word was spreading that the external auditor was asking hard questions. "Seth, do you have a minute?" I asked, stepping into the room and closing the door. He looked up with a forced smile. "Of course, Tiffany. How's the review going? Finding everything in order, I hope?" I sat down across from him and placed a thick folder on the table between us. "I need to ask about vendor relationships. Company policy requires disclosure of any personal or financial connections with external consultants." His smile wavered slightly. "Sure, that makes sense. What do you need to know?" "Do you have any personal or financial relationships with vendors currently working with this division?" "None," he said quickly. Too quickly. I opened the folder and slid a copy of the vendor registry across the table. Voss Insight Partners was highlighted in yellow, along with 8 years of payment records. I said nothing, just watched his face as he read. The color drained from his cheeks, his hands started to shake. That evening, Danny forwarded me a message that made my blood run cold. It wasn't from Seth, it was from Annika Strong, the CHRO. "Delete the vendor extracts and you'll be protected," the message read. "There are other opportunities here for someone with your skills. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I stared at the screen, feeling a familiar anger rise in my chest. They were trying to bribe me. Worse, they were threatening a junior employee who had done nothing wrong except ask honest questions. I immediately called Pearl Keene, the board chair. "I need to expand the scope of my investigation," I told her. "HR systems need to be included." "What's the justification?" she asked. "Possible obstruction and witness intimidation. I'll have a full report on your desk by morning." "Done. You have whatever access you need." After hanging up, I forwarded Danny's message to the legal team with a note. "Evidence of potential witness tampering. Please preserve and document." Annika Strong had just made a serious mistake. In her desperation to protect Seth, she had given me grounds to investigate her too. The IT department produced access logs the next morning, but something was wrong with them. They looked too clean, too perfect. In 10 years of compliance work, I had never seen logs this sanitized. Real systems are messy. Users log in at odd hours, make mistakes, leave sessions open. These logs showed textbook behavior. Clean login and logout times, perfect security protocol compliance, no errors or anomalies anywhere. "These logs have been scrubbed," I told the IT director. He shrugged nervously. "That's what came off the system. I can't change what happened." I pulled up the file properties on my laptop and checked the checksum histories. Digital files leave fingerprints every time they're modified. A gap appeared in the timeline, specifically on the date of the demo from 10 years ago. "Show me the backup appliance that predates your current security system," I demanded. "That old system? It's been decommissioned for years." "Then let's go visit it." The IT director's face went white. He knew exactly what I was looking for, and he knew I was going to find it. Some evidence is too deep to erase completely. The old backup appliance sat in a dusty storage room in the basement, surrounded by obsolete servers and tangled cables. It looked like a relic from another era, but its drives were still intact. "This thing probably doesn't even work anymore," the IT director muttered as we plugged it in. The machine whirred to life, fans spinning and drives clicking. The room filled with the smell of warm plastic and dust. After 10 minutes of loading, a familiar interface appeared on the monitor. "Access the security logs for March 15th, 10 years ago," I instructed. His fingers hesitated over the keyboard. He knew what we were about to find. Finally, he typed the commands and hit enter. The original logs appeared on screen, unaltered and complete. There it was, a privilege escalation from Seth's workstation to my login credentials at 11:47 p.m., the night before the demo. The smoking gun that proved he had framed me. I photographed the screen with my phone, then filled out a chain of custody form with meticulous detail. The IT director signed with shaking hands. "Make sure the system stays secure," I told him. "Evidence tampering is a federal crime." I scheduled a private briefing with CFO Jamari Richer the next morning. I kept my tone neutral and professional as I walked him through the evidence, the vendor conflicts, the forged logs, the timeline of my termination. Jamari's face went through several stages: shock, understanding, then resignation. He was a decent man, caught in an impossible situation. Seth's division generated most of the company's profits, but those profits were built on stolen work. "How bad is this going to get?" he asked quietly. "That depends on how the board wants to handle it," I replied. "But they need to know the full truth before they can make any decisions." Jamari leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. "The client renewal is in 3 weeks. If this comes out publicly, then we'd better handle it privately and professionally," I said. "The board deserves full transparency, and they deserve it through proper channels." He nodded slowly. "I'll authorize complete cooperation with your investigation, whatever you need." "Schedule a pre-read session with the board," I said. "We go live in 5 days." Jamari picked up his phone and started dialing. The endgame was beginning. Seth's counterpunch came faster than I expected. He called an all-hands meeting that afternoon and painted my investigation as a witch hunt that was stalling critical business operations. "We're facing our most important client renewal in company history," he told the assembled employees. "Instead of focusing on delivering results, we're being distracted by backward-looking audits that question decisions made years ago." The room erupted in applause. Seth had always been charismatic, and he knew exactly how to play to people's fears about job security. Several department heads nodded in agreement. I watched from the back of the room and said nothing. Public confrontations were his strength, not mine. Instead, I returned to my office and updated the project status page on the company intranet. "Investigation milestone update," I wrote. "All requested documents received and analyzed. Timeline remains ahead of schedule. Board presentation confirmed for Friday." I didn't respond to his theatrics with words. I responded with results. Silence isn't surrender, it's setup. The truth doesn't need a sales pitch. The hardest conversation came when I interviewed Jamie Walsh, a former colleague who had worked on my original team. She agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown, away from the office. Jamie couldn't meet my eyes as she stirred her latte. "I knew it wasn't you, Tiffany. We all knew." "Then why didn't anyone speak up?" She sighed heavily. "Seth was persuasive. He said you'd been acting strange, working odd hours, acting paranoid about the competition. When the logs showed your credentials, it seemed to fit the story." "What story?" "That you'd cracked under pressure and sabotaged the demo to hurt the company." Jamie finally looked at me. "There was also the Whisper campaign." My stomach dropped. "What Whisper campaign?" "Seth spread rumors that you were unstable, that you'd made threats about getting revenge if you didn't get promoted. He made it sound like you were dangerous." I felt the old anger rising but kept my voice steady. "And everyone believed him?" "He had documentation. Screenshots of messages, meeting notes, performance reviews. It all looked official." She paused. "I'm sorry, Tiffany. We should have questioned it." I subpoenaed the off-channel backup files through the client's legal team that afternoon. Seth invited me to dinner, to talk like old friends. I chose a well-lit cafe at noon instead, with glass walls and plenty of witnesses. I wasn't taking any chances. He arrived wearing his most charming smile and ordered coffee like we were catching up after a brief separation. "Tiffany, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. Maybe there's been a misunderstanding." "What kind of misunderstanding?" "About the vendor relationship. Voss Insight Partners provides legitimate consulting services. If there was a disclosure issue, it was an oversight, not intentional deception." I sipped my coffee and watched him carefully. He was trying the same manipulation tactics that had worked 10 years ago. Reasonable explanations, plausible deniability, appeals to our former friendship. "I'm sorry for how things looked back then," he continued. "The evidence against you seemed overwhelming at the time. If I had known it was wrong." "You're apologizing for how things looked, not for what you did," I said calmly. His smile faltered. "What do you want, Tiffany? What would make this right?" I set down my cup and looked him directly in the eyes. "A clean ledger and the truth. Documented." Seth stopped smiling entirely. Danny brought me a second ledger the next morning, one that hadn't appeared in the original financial records. Her hands shook as she placed it on my desk. "I found this in the archived procurement files," she whispered. "It's a record of unapproved pilot programs." I opened the ledger and felt my breath catch. Every major strategic decision over the past 5 years had been routed through Voss Insight Partners first. Pricing changes, product launches, competitive responses, nothing moved without their input. The vendor wasn't just billing for maintenance on my stolen algorithm. They were embedded in the company's decision-making process, acting as an essential consultant on every critical choice. "This is incredible work, Danny," I said. "How did you find this?" "I've been tracking the approval workflows. There's a gate system that requires sign-off from external advisors before any major initiative can proceed. It's not in the official org chart, but it's in the system code. I added a simple line to tomorrow's board agenda. Gate removal proposal." The puppet strings were about to be cut. The crisis came at the worst possible moment. A critical system rollout failed spectacularly during peak business hours, affecting thousands of users. Seth immediately blamed my audit freeze, claiming that restricted access had prevented his team from implementing necessary fixes. "This is exactly what I warned about," he announced in an emergency management meeting. "The investigation is paralyzing our operations at the worst possible time." My pulse stayed level as chaos erupted around me. I had been expecting something like this, a manufactured crisis designed to make me look like the problem. But I had prepared for this possibility. "Let's try a different approach," I suggested calmly. I pulled up my original algorithm, the one I had developed 10 years ago and carefully preserved in my personal files. Working with the IT team, we deployed it as an emergency replacement for the failing system. Within 2 hours, the metrics stabilized. Performance actually improved beyond previous levels. The system that had been struggling for months was suddenly running smoothly. I moved the success report directly into the board pre-read folder, with timestamps showing exactly when the improvement occurred. The confrontation with procurement was swift and decisive. Armed with the evidence from Danny's second ledger, we called Director Patricia Hayes into a formal review session. "The vendor approval process bypasses normal procurement controls," I stated, laying out the documentation. "Strategic decisions are being influenced by an outside party without proper oversight." Patricia squirmed in her chair. "The approvals came from senior leadership. I was told it was a special project." "Who specifically gave you those instructions?" "Anika Strong signed off on the vendor relationship. Seth provided technical guidance on which decisions needed external review." I placed a copy of the conflict of interest policy on the table. "Did anyone explain why normal procurement rules didn't apply?" "They said it was temporary, just until the new system was fully operational." Patricia's voice grew smaller. "I didn't know it had been running for 5 years. I made a note in my file and looked up at her. "I'm recommending an executive session with the board to discuss procurement reform." That afternoon, I called Pearl Keene directly. "Recommend executive session. We need to discuss vendor oversight and management conflicts." The executive session was scheduled for the next morning. I arrived early and arranged my evidence in neat binders on the conference table, though I never opened them during the presentation. The board members filed in with serious expressions. They knew this wouldn't be a routine update. I spoke slowly and precisely, using no adjectives or emotional language, just facts, timelines, and documentation. The pricing algorithm currently generating 60% of division revenue was developed by a former employee who was terminated under questionable circumstances. I began. I presented the original code lineage, showing my development work and timestamps. Then the privilege escalation logs from the old backup system, proving Seth had accessed my credentials. Finally, the vendor relationship that had monetized my work for 8 years without disclosure. The room was completely silent when I finished. Board members exchanged glances but said nothing for several minutes. Finally, Pearl Keene asked one question. "Is there a path forward without the current management structure?" I nodded calmly. "Yes, the core algorithm is sound and can be maintained internally. The vendor relationship is unnecessary and creates ongoing compliance risks." Pearl looked around the table at her fellow board members. "I think we have enough information to make a decision." The offer came during a private meeting with Jamari and Pearl the next afternoon. They wanted me to take an interim role overseeing the remediation plan, essentially stepping into Seth's position while the company rebuilt its compliance systems. I stared at the table with my hands folded, considering the implications. Taking the job would mean staying at the company that had exiled me, working with people who had watched my reputation destroyed. It would also mean inheriting all the problems Seth had created. "I'll accept under one condition," I said finally. "The company commits to implementing comprehensive protections for whistleblowers and junior employees, and that policy gets published immediately." Jamari and Pearl exchanged glances. "What kind of protections?" Jamari asked. "Anonymous reporting channels, mandatory investigation procedures, and protection from retaliation. People like Danny Park shouldn't have to risk their careers to do the right thing." Pearl smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. "I like that approach. It shows we're serious about cultural change." She pulled out a commitment document and signed it on the spot. "When can you start?" I looked at the signature, still warm from her pen. "As soon as the current management situation is resolved." The endings came quickly after that. Annika Strong resigned quietly on a Thursday afternoon, citing personal reasons. Her resignation letter was brief and formal. No admission of wrongdoing, just a desire to pursue other opportunities. Seth's response was more dramatic. He sent me a midnight email with the subject line, "We could fix this together." "Tiffany," he wrote, "I know how this looks, but there were reasons for everything that happened. If we could sit down privately, I could explain the full situation. Maybe we could find a solution that works for everyone. I never wanted to hurt you." I read the message twice, feeling nothing but exhaustion. Even now, facing the complete collapse of his career, Seth was still trying to manipulate the situation, still trying to find an angle that would let him escape consequences. I replied with a meeting invitation. "Boardroom, 9 a.m. tomorrow. Company counsel will be present to document the conversation." He clicked accept within minutes. Some part of him must have still believed he could talk his way out of this. Some part of him had never stopped believing that his charm and intelligence could overcome any obstacle. Tomorrow, he would learn otherwise. The boardroom was bright and cold when Seth arrived the next morning. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting everything in stark relief. The company's legal counsel sat at one end of the table with recording equipment and a stack of documents. I laid out two paths for Seth as clearly as I could. Full disclosure with a chance to resign gracefully, or formal investigation with termination for cause. Your choice. Seth's confidence had finally cracked. His expensive suit looked rumpled, and his hands shook as he reached for his water glass. "Tiffany, surely we can work something out. I made mistakes, but destroying my career won't change the past." I activated the projector and displayed the 10-year-old log entry showing his privilege escalation into my account. The timestamp glowed on the wall. 11:47 p.m., March 14th, the night before the demo that ended my career. Seth stared at the screen and whispered, "That's not possible." "It's admissible evidence in any legal proceeding," I said quietly. "The question is whether you want to explain it voluntarily or involuntarily." Seth looked at the door like it might open and offer him an escape route, but there was nowhere left to run. The truth had finally caught up with him after 10 long years. "I need time to consider my options," he said. The board voted unanimously. Seth was terminated for cause with immediate effect, all benefits and severance revoked. The Voss Insight Partners contract was canceled, and the vendor permanently barred from future business. All contracts would be rebid through proper procurement channels. The client renewal was approved contingent on successful implementation of the remediation plan I had authored. My algorithm, the real one, not Seth's corrupted version, would continue generating revenue for the company. But now it would be maintained by an internal team with proper oversight and documentation. Jamari walked me through the transition timeline as employees throughout the building learned about the management changes. Some looked shocked, others relieved. A few seemed genuinely surprised that Seth was gone. "The board is impressed with your work," Jamari told me. "Pearl asked me to extend a formal offer. Would you consider staying on to lead the division permanently?" I took a deep breath and looked out the window at the city skyline. 10 years ago, I had been walked out of this building in disgrace, my career in ruins, and my reputation destroyed. Now I was being offered the keys to the kingdom. But revenge, I had learned, wasn't about taking what had been taken from you. It was about building something better. I declined the throne, but accepted a different mandate. Instead of becoming division president, I would build and lead a new ethics and mentorship program with substantial budget and real authority. My job would be protecting people like Danny Park and ensuring that the truth could always find a way to surface. In the lobby, Seth waited with a cardboard box tucked under his arm. The same kind of box I had carried 10 years ago. His shoulders were slumped, his expensive clothes wrinkled, his confident smile gone forever. He looked up as I approached the elevator. "Are you satisfied now, Tiffany?" I stopped and considered his question seriously. Was I satisfied? Had 10 years of preparation and 6 weeks of investigation brought me the closure I was looking for? "I'm done," I told him simply. The elevator arrived and the doors opened to reveal Danny Park and 2 other junior analysts waiting to go up. They stepped aside to let me enter, their faces bright with excitement about their new projects. As the doors closed, I turned to face forward instead of looking back. Seth disappeared from view, left alone in the lobby with his cardboard box and his ruined reputation. I hadn't destroyed him. The truth had done that all by itself. I had simply given it a voice and a platform. Now I had a chance to build a future he could never touch, one where talented people like these young analysts could thrive without fear. The elevator rose, carrying us all towards something better.